Welcome to Make Me Data Literate, the podcast that makes data intelligible from the Australian Data Science Education Institute. We're on a mission to make the whole world data literate. I'm your host, Dr. Linda McIver, and every week I'll interview someone with a wild and wonderful relationship to data. Let's see what we can find out. Hello, and thanks for listening to another episode of Make Me Data Literate. I'm so excited today to have my wonderful friend Mel Flanagan here to talk to us. This is going to be quite different, I think, to the episodes so far. I think we're all going to learn a lot. So welcome, Mel. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Linda.
Very exciting. So I like to get people to introduce themselves because I learn things even about people I know really well. So can you tell us who you are and what you do?
Sure. I'm Mel Flanagan. I'm based on Gadigal country in lovely New South Wales. And I'm a storyteller and a maker and a civic technologist. So my background was making theatre and film and working on all sorts of big projects like large and small musical theatre, films, documentaries, visual effects, animation. And then I sort of transitioned into creating information services and sort of data storytelling on this sort of wild and woolly journey that I had through making some government services. So yeah, so I've have a little company called Nook Studios. We're based in Surrey Hills, and I have a fantastic crew of artists, designers, developers, data analysts, and makers, and incredible people who all come together to work on different projects. Nook is, because I'm a producer from way back, we're also, I love making things. So we're also developing storytelling tools as well. And a lot of those have to do with bringing data together and making data a bit more meaningful for people who are, less technical, and for sort of general public and more kind of community audiences.
That's amazing. I love that journey from nothing to do with data at all through to this data heavy, but really social aspect of data science, I suppose. That communication angle, which is so important and often a little bit neglected.
Yeah, it's
um
interesting. Sorry, I was just going
no
to say,
good.
it's interesting you say that. I mean, filmmaking is very data heavy. It's a real
Huh.
art. So there's a lot of tools. So when you're thinking about, like, if you're creating a product, there's always the money involved. So what's your budget? Where are you getting it from? How much are you spending? I mean, when you are thinking about crunching numbers, it's crunching data. Is it going to be a $1 million movie? Is it a $40 million movie? All of those decisions about how to interpret a script is actually kind of data decisions. The other thing that, particularly when you're working in visual effects and animation, like all of those digital assets are a piece of data that all comes together from different developers and artists who are creating something. And so there's actually quite a lot of sophisticated tools in the industry to track information, to track data, and naming conventions, and all this stuff that I learnt very early on around information management all came from working in theatre and film.
That's really cool. I very carefully didn't say nothing to do with tech because I knew it was tech heavy, but I hadn't thought of it as as a data heavy industry. That's a really cool perspective. I like that. Um, what did you have to learn to do the work that you're doing now? As in, what was missing from your formal education? Like, I'm guessing, given your career path, you didn't come out of school and university with, data science was the plan. What did you have to teach yourself?
No, I certainly didn't. I came out of high school going, I'm going to work in the music industry,
Oh,
and
cool.
yeah, then I sort of did that for a little while, and then I transitioned into musical theatre, and then transitioned into film and theatre. And so storytelling was always a huge part of my, what I wanted to do, and my, the love of things that and also making things too. And so I didn't go to university because I was like, well, I can do what I want to do, and I can just learn, in practice rather than in study. And there wasn't really any courses for the stuff that I really wanted to do at university. Back then I could have done comms or journalism or something like that. But it just felt like a really long, hard road to kind of get to, just to get to where I wanted to get to. So I was really lucky. I had a lot of really great work experiences. And one of them was working on with Cameron Mackintosh. I'm working on Cats and Les Mis and Phantom of the Opera and Miss Saigon and a whole bunch of musical theatre shows back in the day when it was the first time around. And that's where I really learnt the value of managing information and my first computer experience where I was like, oh, I could type something in and the computer would do something. And I mean, that back in those days, we were using photocopies where you had to kind of crank a thing to, photocopy stuff. So it was pretty rudimentary. And I guess back then when I started working, I was like, oh, this computer stuff's really interesting. I love that. I love that I can make it do things, and that it was a language all unto itself. So, but I could have probably gone and done comp science at that point, maybe, but I chose not to. When I started working in film, I was working for a company and it was sort of the first of its kind in Australia, and we had a lot of information coming in. We had a lot of scripts being submitted. And so having had that experience in theatre and knowing, there was lots of information that needed to be captured and managed and categorised and all the rest of it in old school ways, as in filing, I then sort of started exploring making databases. And so I created a database that was tracking all of the projects that were coming in, the people who were attached to the projects, where the projects were up to, and any information I could find in terms of breaking that script down to make it kind of easily accessible for us, because we were getting 10 submissions a day of films. And I thought,
Whoa.
this was like day one of when we opened our doors. And I thought that's just going to be a lot of information to manage in the future. And 7 to 8 years in, working in that sort of role and for companies where we, were taking on ideas that people had. In the end, it was a database that was over 7,000 projects, big. And it was an incredible lesson in terms of, yes, a lot of that information was in my head, but thankfully I was able to create the databases that we needed to be able to track that information, share that information, and just have this incredible just trove of information about the Australian film industry over that period of time. So I loved it. I loved actually making that as a productivity tool. And that led me to kind of thinking about some of the other tools that I could be making to help people do their work and be more efficient, and also, manage information better and manage knowledge, really. And so that kind of led me down this road of really wanting to learn a bit more about tech and how I could, what I needed to learn and what I could do to kind of create these systems. And it was around about the time, internet was kicking in. And so I wanted to move more into kind of creative tech. I then had the opportunity to work, and I wanted to get experience in visual effects and animation, because that was that beautiful kind of cross-section of people working who are making beautiful pictures, telling stories, but also technical as well. So I really wanted to work with developers. So I went off and started working with a visual effects company called Rising Sun Pictures and Dr. D Studios, and created a tool to help them manage and track projects and people and the vast amount of information that we needed. And when I started at Dr. D, we had about 130 crew, and we needed to kind of, scale up to another couple of hundred. By the end, we had to hire over 750 people in a very, very short period of time. And I was able to build a tool that allowed that to happen, to manage, all of the information that comes with engaging with people, plus their contracts and, all the rest of it. So it was really fun, and that was my learning on the fly how to design a product, really, and to do kind of user experience, and just in a very agile way design a tool that was really desperately needed in the production environment, that meant that we could move very quickly. And it also gave me a bit of cred with the developers, because they were like, oh, we're all making tools to make pretty pictures. And I was like, yeah, well, you can't make pretty pictures without the people. So so by the end, it was really fun. And so yeah, I got a real taste for making and being a producer and wanting to make products that are reusable and that are useful. Yeah, that kind of just got me on this journey of where I am now, which is so far from filmmaking. It's kind of crazy, but it's all part of the sort of the tapestry of the story of kind of where I got to and where I am now.
I love that you kind of saw a problem and decided to fix it, and then needed a bit more, a bit more, a few more tech skills to do that. So you just went and got the tech skills, and fixed the problem and learnt what you needed to do to fix the problem. And that's like the best parts of the tech industry, I think, where you know just it's a means to an end. It's not an end in itself.
Yeah, and I think my first real job really that was using data and was like truly data storytelling as opposed to making a productivity tool. It's still a tool, it was a communications tool, but it was kind of revolutionary for its time. So because of the visual effects and animation experience that I had, someone in the New South Wales government who was running a innovation program. It was an ICT innovation program, and they said, "Hey Mel, it's about mobile. It's do you want to come in and be part of this launch of this initiative?" So I rocked up, and there was me, the storyteller, with a room full of people from ICT, and I didn't really know what ICT meant back then. And so it was kind of hilarious, but it was a great experience because a number of different departments got up and started talking about the challenges and how to use mobile technology. And a lot of those challenges were to do with collecting data and and also publishing that data. The One of the departments that spoke about the problem they had was around mining and production and oil and gas projects across New South Wales and not being able to communicate that to a community audience. I'd been doing research on an interactive doco series that I wanted to make using data and maps and project information and bringing all that together to try and help communities understand, the processes around materials and resources and the life cycle of things. And so I'd kind of had this sort of very, nerdy sort of background in terms of that as a subject matter. And yeah, just had the opportunity to work with that department, which is the Geoscience Information Program, in making a platform. It was really a communications tool that was bringing all the data about mining projects, oil and gas exploration projects and activities across New South Wales into a format which was for a community audience. So it was explaining the things that were the data, all the different data points, in order to help people in the community understand what all of the stuff meant and find what was happening in their local area. So that got me really hooked on location services and map making because that was fun and everyone loves a map. And so again, it was this through sort of being at the right place, right time, right attitude, having that ability to have that experience to make something through the lens of storytelling and communications that was bringing data together in a way that no one had really kind of really seen before. And that project has been really successful and it's still out there. And now, today, that was 2012 we started on that project, and 10 years later, Common Ground is still out there. And yeah, so that was kind of an exciting experience, and that kind of got me in on the track that I am now, which is taking the storytelling skills that I have into government and helping governments and organisations be more transparent, communicate better, how to design systems that allow for public participation and to allow people to be able to have informed conversations around specific issues, particularly when it comes to energy and resources and natural resources or infrastructure projects. And the other thing that we've done is really kind of thinking about policy and legislation, and I know that it doesn't sound like it's a data story, but they sort of are, because there are a series of rules, and rules have decision making points and data points. And so often what we're doing is there's a whole movement around open data, which is kind of well known, and open data is a thing. And often data is collected as part of a process, or it's through the prism of a legislation, or a journey over something or a project. So what we've started doing is to help people make sense of that data, is to be able to map it to processes, and have really kind of started a movement around people thinking about open process as a thing and a way to bring data to life, but also just be more transparent and communicate better.
And there's such a big gap, isn't there, between data being open and data being accessible? So to be bridging that gap and sort of taking the data and making it meaningful and communicating it in ways that people are actually equipped to understand is such an important step.
It's so overwhelming. There's advocates all over the world who are really fighting really hard to get data out there and get it open and get it into the community. And it's like, think about tax transparency, for example. A lot of I'm on the steering committee of Publish What You Pay, which is a coalition of 700 organisations all over the world who are looking at transparency and accountability and participation in extractive industries. And so everyone's kind of like, oh, we've got we know what taxes people are paying, or trying to find out the revenues. And it's just information overload, and a lot of the information's out there. It's in PDFs. It's not very accessible. It's in one place. It's not joined. There's no context, and so there's this avalanche of data, but it's impossible to use, or it's really difficult to use. You need very technical skills, and there's not a lot of really clear explainers of what all that stuff means and how to interpret properly. And so there's this fear factor from industry about being open, because they go, people are going to misuse the data. There's a fear factor from governments being open with their data, because they're like, oh, people are just going to misuse it. They're going to misrepresent it. And my take on that is, not if you explain it well and you have a dictionary that travels around with it. And so, you need to provide that context, because otherwise people will get lost and they will misuse it and it will be misrepresented. So we do a lot of advocacy work and a lot of talking about that, which is, how to kind of get your data out there and make it kind of usable, and the sort of platforms and the kind of information that people need to be able to engage with it properly.
That last point is really significant in terms of the basic communication principles of understanding what your audience already knows and trying to pitch it at the right level. And it ties in nicely with the next question, which is there one thing that you wish everyone knew about data? Would it, is there one thing that if you could get that message across, it would completely revolutionize the world?
Oh, it's not one thing, Linda, but I do I do have a way of thinking about this, which I wanted to share with you, because I think it's a really hard question to answer. But I think, like, every piece of data is a story, like it's part of a story. And it's important to remember it's connected to something else and it came from somewhere. So when I think about data, it brings to mind the saying, a picture is worth 1,000 words. And if a picture is worth 1,000 words, imagine how much data it has. I mean, there's a lot of data in the picture. And so the role of a data researcher, analyst, and storyteller is to see things through different lenses and explain it. So if you think about, like, imagine a photo of, or a picture of a green leaf that's turned slightly brown, lying on some soil. It might be a forest floor, but we don't know, because the focus of the photo is the leaf. Because it's on dirt, not on a pavement, we may assume it's in the countryside, or it might be in a city park, but we don't really know. And we can't see the tree, we can't see the forest, the sky, or the weather. Did the leaf fall because of the wind or the season, or is the tree dying? If we were going to widen the view and look outside the frame of that picture or that photo, we might see the animal that might depend on it for food, or a bird that uses it to build its nest. Like one piece of data tells us very little. If we can't rely on that one piece of data to do the analysis and make, we can't rely on that one piece of data, that picture, to do an analysis and make an informed decision if we don't understand its context and the wide frame and the other things that are connected to it. The other thing, I mean, and that comes back to perspective and bias, and the opportunity to kind of be able to take that bigger view and sort of expand your mind and expand that thinking. So if we were able to widen the view even further, maybe we'd be able to see some humans logging the trees, or how would that impact our analysis or opinion of the health of the forest? And then you imagine that 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 leaf at a bird's eye view, and the amount of data that we're collecting in our heads and in our minds, and that's potentially going to inform a decision around something, is just mind blowing. So I think that for me is it's particularly because a lot of the work we do is around environmental data and environmental impacts. I think that it's all really about making sure you have that bigger view and that perspective to be allowing you to do the proper research and analysis and work out what are the data points you really need to be able to fit for purpose for the what outcome you kind of are looking for, or what you're researching.
There's a saying in the industry that 2 data points does not make a trend, and you could adapt that to be 2 data points doesn't tell the story. Don't tell the story.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing is, like, data is very, very personal, and similar to the leaf, the person, we have data about the data about me or you, like each little piece creates the story, the entity, the character, the world that we inhabit. It's the story of our ancestors, it's the story of our family, our friends, our community, work colleagues. Like, one choice I make in unknowingly sharing some data may potentially impact everyone. And I think, that's where the world's at right now, in terms of, like, there's just so much data out there, and a lot of it's, being collected without our knowledge and being misused. That's a real, it's a kind of it's a real concern. So they're all the things I think about when I think about data.
I love that because it's such a different angle to the classic. It's very easy to get lost in the technicalities of the analysis and to zero in so closely on the data that all you can see are the numbers and the trend lines and things. Whereas that ability to pull back and understand the context that the data is in, and the impact of the data, and the relevance and the meaning is I think crucially important, but often not a part of the data science education scene. You come out with skills in Tableau and R and Python, but you don't necessarily come out with that perspective skill.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, if I think about some of the what I learned very early on when I was working in ICT with ICT people, um,
Mm.
a lot of whom were men, and when we were sort of making the early kind of doing the early work, when it came to the data, and like our one person in particular on that project was, oh, don't, the data's not your concern, don't you worry about that. and and I was like, the data is content. Like, we're the content people. That's what you've given us the job to do, the content, and to make this thing, to make it a great experience. People interact with data. Like, data is content, content is data, and they're the stories, and we need to, of course, we need to understand the data in order to be able to design for it, and access to it and understanding it. So it didn't happen in the beginning of that project, and we lost 6 months worth of work because the data, the people who were building, the developers, weren't, they mistook the data for something else, and then we had to kind of basically undo it and do it all again once we kind of worked
Oh
it out.
boy.
So they're expensive mistakes, and I've really learnt to kind of hold my ground now as a woman. Yeah, sure, I don't have a data science degree, but I've worked enough with data to kind of be able to question it, interact with it, understand how I might be able to use it, play with it, experiment, and work with others. And I think this is the biggest thing, which is when people are working in isolation and there is no collaboration, it leads to really bad outcomes. And I think that some of the biggest sort of data disasters around are really around when it's been a kind of expert group of people who have been, making something with data, or doing a data analysis, or making those decisions without widening, and opening it up to the contribution and participation of others. And I think that's probably, very much around. I think about service design as well. Algorithms and algorithmic decision making, and not kind of testing them with humans. And there's quite a lot of work around data literacy going on at the moment, and some of it's around sort of communities and place-based decision making, and sort of Aboriginal communities as well, and Indigenous communities. And it really upsets me when they go, "Oh, we're going to get the data experts in. We're going to get the data experts in to help people." And people who are living in communities, and you and I, like we're also, we have a lot to contribute. We have data that we can contribute. We have ideas, like we have ways to validate information and to test it and to question, and we've got a lot to offer. So I think all of that's it's really important, so data disasters don't happen. The thing with making really kind of healthy data systems and data services, it's not just about the analysts and the data scientists. We really need to get people in as part of that making process, and through the data discussion, getting designers in, getting storytellers in, getting visual storytellers in. It's not just about the sort of putting something into a tableau. It's just what's the context, like what's all the other things around this data that is really important to people, and what do we need to know, and what's missing, like where are the gaps. And the other thing is the validation of data. It's a really big trend. Well, it's just a practice, particularly with government, where they're collecting things like, we'll collect the evidence base for that policy or that program. And the evidence base will maybe come from some academics. It might come from some data analysis that they've done, or whatever it may well be. And so rarely is it actually, do they ask people, like the public, to be able to look at that data, validate that data, contribute their own information that is, helping to the development of that policy, that program, or even contributing to projects. So I think that is where we really, really need to move to, which is opening up those processes. And there's another, example of opening up process, and opening up to much more kind of participation and contributions from the public and others into that decision-making process. So people are making the right decisions. And they're talking to getting the right people in the room as well, and hearing, having people's voices heard. And I think it's such an important time now for us to be really thinking about that, and really questioning some of the decisions that are being made, and just making them better, like making things better.
That's right. It's the idea of having the voices of the people concerned involved in the process, and actually listening to the community, and so one of the things that I always put in my project is that sort of step of reflection. If you're solving a problem, to consider who's helped and who's harmed by your solution, and what are the potential unintended side effects of the solution you've implemented. Like Monash University banned smoking on campus, which was a wonderful thing, but they put smoking points around the outside right next to the bike path. So you're riding home and you go through this cloud, this intense cloud of cigarette smoke, and maybe if they'd had a little more, community consultation, they might have found a better place to put that wasn't right next to,
Yeah,
you know,
crazy.
yeah.
That's yeah, that placemaking is kind of really important. We were working on we were doing a piece of work with the Department of Agriculture, Water and Environment, and it was around the so we do a lot of visual interpretation of legislation, which is fun times, and it's very complicated. Legislation is very complicated, and so when thinking about environmental impact assessments and statements is kind of in terms of the work we do with natural resources. It's a fundamental piece of research and engagement that needs to be done in order for projects to go ahead. It could be property development, could be agriculture, mining, production, renewable energy projects, and often the sort of all of that sort of data gathering and the information that goes into the environmental impact statement, or the environmental impact statement for a start, is usually the time when the public and the communities really understand that there's a project that's coming up. And so all of this information is gathered into this report, and people have 40 days to read it, review it, look at the data, validate it, and put in submissions. It's usually about 40, 45 days. It often happens well in like years into projects being planned and and investment. And so one of the things that happens is that the time factors aren't really allowing people to meaningfully contribute, but also people from local communities generally don't get to contribute the data. And some of those data sources are pretty old, or like when it or just they haven't been captured at the right time. So when you're thinking about species, environmental data, a lot of people don't realize that in order to get the data to make those decisions, like some species are quiet during autumn, winter, like they don't come out. So you don't really see them until, the season that they're most active. And so, these surveys need to be done over a long period of time.
Yeah.
And often it's people who are the locals or the Indigenous community local to that area who really know a lot about, their local environment, their area, and they're really closed out of those, that process. So there's a real kind of movement to get people in earlier and to be part of that sort of project design and thinking, but also to be collecting that data and be able to contribute it in a meaningful way, rather than creating this kind of them and us sort of scenario at the moment, which doesn't suit, it doesn't work well, and things don't, end well, because people aren't participating and part of that kind of project design and, decision making, and they can't really provide the information that's needed. It's just this sort of reactive thing to a 1,200 page report that's been posted on the internet, that rather than being able to kind of meaningfully engage with that information and kind of validate it.
Yeah, plus, the idea of locking in decisions before you've actually really done any consultation process, and then, everyone's committed to this particular path before they've actually checked whether that's a reasonable path to go down, and whether there are, again, side effects.
Well, I mean, Juk and Gorge, classic example, terrible, terrible, terrible example of, I mean, it's a process, it's a problem. It is obviously clearly a problem of respect, but it's a data problem too. I mean, it really is. And, in its kind of finest part, it's just there's a whole bunch of stuff being done around that, that project that the local community weren't involved with, and I think it's been a real wake up call for everyone to try and not make that happen. But I haven't really seen clear steps on how people are going to fix it and not make it happen again. But at least it's really, really got people thinking that things have to be done really differently. And I think it's up to the data community and people who work in environmental surveying and all the rest of it to really kind of think about how to do those things differently too.
Yeah. Yeah, it is that actually pulling back and seeing the big picture of the processes that we go through, and how to improve those, and um, build that level of participation and consultation at the right stages of the project. It's like, when the field of usability was new, the perception was you could just bolt usability on at the end. Build the product and then go, okay, is it usable? No, well, we'll just move this button and then it'll be usable. And it's, but it has to be from the
Yeah,
outset that process is is begun, and engaged with the whole thing. You've talked already about a few fairly impressive data mistakes. Is there anything else you want to add to sort of that point of the worst data mistakes that you've seen?
well, I think one of my it's a terrible story. One of my favourite stories though is the NHS COVID spreadsheet when they were, because NHS don't have a database, they've got a
Yeah.
spreadsheet,
Yep.
and they reached the million row limit and kind of missed 16,000 cases and some, and then everyone was like, oh lordy, 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 we're using spreadsheets. It's 2020 people. I mean, seriously. So that for me is it's a real indicator that people don't take data seriously. Like they
Yeah.
just don't take data governance seriously. And I was, before we started chatting, I got online the other day, like yesterday, to look up that story again just to get my facts right,
Yep.
and notice that there's still the data, like spreadsheet templates, NHS are out there, sharing around for people to collect their data. And
Yeah.
it just, I mean, health data is really personal.
Yeah.
And the fact that all this stuff's being shared around on spreadsheets, obviously, shared by email, put onto USBs, left
Mm.
on a train,
Mm.
classic examples of, data breaches and, people's very, very personal private data being, out there in the world. I mean, the governments have a responsibility to actually be designing and developing these very like proper data systems. Like,
Yeah.
what's wrong with building a database, people? Like, it's not that hard. It's, we can send people to the moon. Why
Yep.
can't we just, build a database for this stuff that people can engage with? And this also brings to mind, sports rorts and all the government grant giving that's happening in Australia right now,
Mm.
where all of that's been shared on a spreadsheet.
Mm.
And I think, come on, like we need to have these systems in place for integrity, for
Yeah.
accountability,
Yeah.
but for just, I mean, helping people just do their jobs properly.
Yeah. And
I
then,
mean, this is a productivity. This is this is such an important productivity conversation that needs to be had.
yeah, definitely productivity, but also, as you say, privacy and security and stuff, that they wonder why, 10 something like 10% of people opted out of my health record. Because not necessarily a fear um of the government del- being evil with the data, but just being careless with it. The lack of safeguards over who could access that record and what they might see is just, it's hard to have faith.
Yeah, it is hard to have faith. And I think if I was really going to think about one of the most serious, awful data stories that I've heard is, and this is one of the reasons why a lot of governments are starting to think about how to, responsibly share data. It's very complicated. Like a lot of departments don't trust each other. A
Mm.
lot of organisations don't trust each other. And,
Yeah.
thinking about, police through to health to education and, the justice system. And so the Queensland Information Office has been doing a lot of work around this. And when I was working on a project with the New South Wales Chief Data Scientist, Ian Opperman, a couple of years ago, we were engaging with a few of the information officers, and Queensland had this, incredible story and, really the real driver for them was kids were getting lost in the system.
Yeah.
Like kids were getting lost in the system. They couldn't find them. There was no way to track them. And, the information about them just wasn't being collected in a way where it was, their safety was being put at risk.
Mm.
And so that is just, they're the most vulnerable of vulnerable. And we need these systems in place, and we need these safe systems in place. And that data sharing, yes, it's complicated and comes with risks, but it's also incredibly important as well. And we need those systems and checks and balances in place. And I mean, COVID's a classic example of the movement of sharing data
Mm.
now across jurisdictions because we really, really had to. And
Yeah.
so, so the laws and systems kind of need to move with pace.
Yeah. It's the things move so fast in technology and in data that the legal processes just can't keep pace, and the standard systems of government and processes of sort of developing legislation and even identifying the need for developing legislation, those standard processes just are not fit for purpose anymore.
No, and I also think there needs to be like proper investment in those systems that people in government use,
Hmm.
because legislation can, it's a big fat stick and it kind of gives you the guidance and the rules. But in order to make that happen, people need the systems. And that's where there's a real lack of investment, that there's a real opportunity for governments to do better and be connecting information in a way where it helps people inside government, but also the public as well and business to be able to do what they need to do and find the information they need to find really quickly.
Yeah.
There's a real focus on transactional services rather than information services. And fair call, because we need transactional services, and that's important too. But
Hmm.
again, COVID highlight the people need information, and I don't want to see it in PDF. Thanks.
Yes, that's come up in at least 3 interviews so far, has been the problem of data in PDFs. So there's no other way to access it.
Oh, but it's also just information. I mean, PDFs are so helpful for people who don't actually have, like, so if you, not everyone has access to digital.
Yep.
So it's always important to have the print. Like we always do stuff in print and online as well, and
Mm.
as many formats as what people need. But the printed format is really powerful because you can put it on a table, you can put it on a wall, you can share it around, you can put it in a post box. For people who don't have digital. But if I'm on my phone wanting to read information about COVID and how to protect myself or whatever it is, I want to be able to see it, in the device, the kind of natural format to the device that I'm looking at,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah. That's a big
But
problem.
yeah, I mean, data in spreadsheets, annual reports is a classic example, particularly in the sort of mining, oil and gas transparency space, where they're like, yeah, it's all in the annual report. Like, great, can't do
Yeah.
anything with that.
Yeah.
Yes, you're being open, but actually, you're not really.
It's a kind of mythical openness, or like a sham, false open.
Yeah, but also it comes back to, some of them question who's the audience for that information. Like, they don't really know how to make it more accessible
Mm.
and why people want it or what they want to do with it. So that's kind of the role that we have, which is going, yeah, there's a whole bunch of people out there who want to know this information, and and why, and let's kind of work together to get it out there because it's
Yeah.
going to serve everyone well.
Yeah.
Um, because if we can do that, but we're kind of getting there. We're getting there slowly but surely. We're getting there.
In an earlier episode, Owen Churches made the comment that we really need an army of information architects. That we need to be building the structures and the systems and the governance to to manage all of this data in a way that it's secure and accessible and meaningful, and all of the things that we need data to be, that we kind of just wave our hands and hope Hope that some kind of magical process makes it happen when it's just in a spreadsheet on somebody's laptop half the time, not even backed up.
And the same deal goes with, yeah, that's absolutely. And then there's also things change over time. Things change.
Mm.
And so, I mean, I think about one of the projects we did, which is when we're going in and doing sort of content strategy, content design, information projects, we're often going in and, looking at scraping websites and looking at how many pages or, where all the data is and what kind of data it is. It's a data analysis and content analysis. And, when you start getting to page 2 million, someone's got a real problem. But it's, but these information systems and data repositories grow over time, and they're often stuck in time, and they're not thought of as having to evolve and change. And so when people think about data standards too, there's this real resistance to data standards because people are like, oh, I signed up for that standard, and damn it, now it's changing. I don't want to do that standard anymore. And it's, of course, things have to change because needs change, information changes, people's interest, or the focus of things, and so we have to build in adaptability to all of these systems that we're building, but also the notion that change is going to happen. Like, it has to happen. You can't just publish and walk away and let it go, because things, we need to be able to have that currency and that credibility of the information, really kind of foremost in our minds.
Yeah, and if you're going to respond to, say, an unprecedented global pandemic, then you've got to be able to do things you've never done before, and respond in ways you've never responded before. And that's, the when you build, we tend to build these systems as the gold standard. This is it. This is done. We've built it. That's it. Now we move on. Like, it's that forevermore. And life just
I
doesn't
mean,
work that way.
yeah, I mean, I'd like to. I mean, the dashboard of death that we were so familiar with during COVID
Hmm.
is, there's a lot of energy, and I think this has kind of acclimatized people to data and data stories and in a particular way. But again, the and it, I think there was a level of people expect data now, and I think it really was this kind of, it really shifted data into a different trajectory in terms of making it really simple and and trying to get it out there. And we've got a lot more kind of data systems or data visualization tools that we've ever had, which is fantastic.
Hmm.
Some of them are easy to use and some of them are not. But I think that again, coming back to the dashboard of death, is there were other stories happening at the same time, like other diseases that were going untreated. There was all of
Hmm.
this other stuff that was going on that, just because the lens was so laser focused on that, it just all kind of faded away. And I think if there's anything that we take away from this, is we would just have to have a broader, breadth of view of things, because it's left us all in this really, a lot of people in a really, really terrible place, and people are still really, really struggling to recover. So,
Yeah. Have you ever seen data deliberately misused and willfully misrepresented?
uh, yes, I have, and it's kind of an interesting story, and it's one that's good over a fire and wine sometime. Quite a long story, but the short version is, I in my transition between film and working as doing civic tech stuff, I was working in a little boutique hotel in Potts Point called Regent's Court, and it was the most beautiful place. It was family run and owned and had a gorgeous rooftop garden, and it was amazing. It was 30 rooms, and it was an artist retreat, and it was brilliant. We lost about 70% of our business around about the time, soon after I started, and it was around the time when the kind of internet industry had really, sort of the travel industry had moved online. And it was quite befuddling because there was a lot of strong word of mouth and around that business.
Mm.
So I kind of started looking at why, and people were calling up, going, "Hey, I can't find you on the internet. I'm getting onto a travel website, and
Mm.
they're saying that you don't have any rooms available." And I'd be like, "Well, we have rooms available. We're free. Like, just book through us." And then I started going down the rabbit hole of what this all meant. And so it was basically big travel companies were taking information, which was they'd found a database from some ancient like travel kind of global distribution services, booking services, and basically taken all of the names of the hotels, dumped them into their own database, had like profiles for all of the like pretty much every hotel and boutique hotel, big hotel, whatever you name it, whatever it was, and were basically misrepresenting an association with all of those businesses. So that is how a lot of the big travel companies made their fortunes, was through basically detracting guests away from small hotels who weren't actually on their platform because they were showing no availability for rooms because they had no idea whether we had rooms or not. And when you called them up and said, "Hey, you're listing information, data about our business on your website and you're showing no availability, can you please remove us?" They would say, "Hey, pay us 30% commission and we'll show availability."
Oh,
So it was this sort of awful situation for a lot of small businesses because they were very, very, very large companies who were protected by the very, very large search engines. And so there was no way you could take them on because they're outside of our jurisdiction, and if they took you down on the Australian site, you'd still pop up in Germany or France or wherever people were coming from overseas. So it really, really damaged small businesses and the travel industry. And I tried to take it on with the ACCC, and they didn't. It was too early in internet days, and
mm.
they didn't really understand what was going on, and everyone was like, "Oh, they're all the good guys." But they're not. And that was their business model. They were misusing data. They were taking data and just getting it out there. And it was opt out, pay us to opt out, or, don't
That's
opt out.
outrageous.
It was pretty outrageous. So, I mean, that's my personal experience. And that has led me, it's kind of one of the things that really led me on this journey of understanding how things work, what the processes are around things, but also transparency as well. Like, really try to understand, what are our rights? What do we need to understand, and how can we, what do we what do we need to do to kind of like address all of this really terrible behavior that big companies can really uh, can do.
Yeah. Yeah, it is that power of sort of a market monopoly as well. You haven't got any choice but to go through us because we're the dominant in the market somehow. Do you have techniques that you use to spot data misuse? Like if you see a graph in the media, what do you look for?
The first thing is I look is like who's paid for it. Um, what's their agenda, and
Mm.
and I think that's really, yeah, it's more around the people who are putting the data together, and what's their viewpoint of the world. I have to say, I just find so much. I mean, I love data visualization, and I'm a data storyteller, and I guess a lot of graphs leave me cold. But there's a real the thing I look for is the labels. Like,
Yeah.
firstly, can I read it? Probably, usually not. And also, what are they trying to say, and does it match what I'm seeing? And we've been doing a piece of work actually recently with a energy provider, the sort of a battery systems provider. We've been doing some research on like different apps and different data visualizations and showing sort of solar and battery and energy sources and all the rest of it. And it's quite extraordinary how even some of the biggest apps in the world, you still look at them and go, I can't make head or tail of what you're trying to tell me.
Yeah.
It's just makes no sense. And I was talking to someone about the app that they were using the other day, and I was like, "Oh, I love this thing." And I was like, "What about that? What does that mean?" He was like, "Oh, I have no idea." So someone who he works with data scientists. He's very data literate.
Mm,
And we both were like, oh, it's so befuddling that something like that just exists in the world and doesn't get fixed.
yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, that's a shocker. Do you think that that our attitude to data and our understanding of data has changed through the pandemic?
Yes. Yeah, I do. I mean, I think, yes, it has. And I think our understanding of so many things has changed due to the pandemic.
Mm,
Um, and the awareness of, yeah, definitely data, things like government contracts and procurement, which people didn't really care. I mean, some people cared, but didn't really think about previously. Things like IP and the intellectual property behind vaccines, and there's so much that people are now kind of really thinking about because of the pandemic that they didn't really think about before, or didn't really kind of go, oh, that really impacts me, or that really affects me. Whereas now we know that it does. We do a lot of work around open contracting and things like beneficial ownership information. So beneficial ownership is the people behind the companies, who they are, because often companies are like layers upon layer upon layer.
yeah.
And that's another, data story. Like, who's the person that ultimately controls, influences, and benefits from the company
Hmm.
and its business dealings. And so there's a data standard for that. There's also, data standards around, mapping contracting data and transparency and being able to kind of connect data in a meaningful way. And I think that if anything, people really, really care now about who's behind those decisions, who's behind the companies, how are they benefiting, what are their political relationships.
Mm,
I mean, you just have to think of the UK and the PPE disaster stories and,
yeah.
Tory politicians and all the rest of it. And, behind all of that sits data and their data stories. Like, there's ways that we can be collecting data in a way that allows that to, well, not happen,
Mm,
or make it harder for, for those kind of that kind of corruption to exist. So yeah, I think that there's a lot of work to be done, and there's a lot more impetus now because the public have that awareness that we should have access to that information. We should know who the government's doing business with and who they're buying from and
mm.
how much.
Yep. Yep. I hadn't thought about that. As I was thinking of COVID graphs and you know exponential growth and things like that we've all had a rapid introduction to, but the contracts and stuff is a whole other um, can of worms that we've never really looked into before in with much enthusiasm, and suddenly we see that it's important on a daily basis.
Yeah. It's like the, environmental impact statements. They're data stories.
Yeah.
Contracts are data stories too.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of information that's embedded in there that is really important that people need to have access to, and most we don't, because the commercial in confidence or whatever, which is a fallacy. But certain things can be redacted,
Mm.
but the rest of it should just be out there.
I love that. I love that. We need to shout that from the rooftops, which I guess is a big part of what you do. um, to wrap it all up, I've just loved this. It's been such a, as I knew it would be, such a different angle and such an important angle on data. And I'm sure that a lot of this is, you'll have, we'll have listeners going, oh my God, I've never thought of that, which is fabulous. What excites you about data?
Well, there's yeah, I thought saw that question, and I was like, so much. Where does one even begin?
I was like, what's the
Um,
one thing you want people to know? What excites you about data? Condense
yeah,
it.
um, look, I think I mean I love the data discovery process. We do a lot of like data discovery work, and I think the thing that excites me about data is when we can start kind of uncovering what we can find, particularly, and I'm talking in kind of government and or the way that industry works and operates, or businesses, and just the kind of storytelling and the work that we do, which is all around sort of social and environmental impact. It's when I find data and I go, oh, we can find something really useful there, that someone can take that information it's in a format that they can do something with it that is
Mm.
going to really impact and help them in their lives. And so that's the thing where it's taking that kind of the raw data and being able to find something and go, this can help you, this is, here it is. And be able to have those conversations and build that kind of data literacy with a lot of different people and getting more people in the room to have those conversations about data, to go, what are the gaps? What do we need? It's like, I think there's a real rising of consciousness around the need for that, which is really exciting. So I think it's that sort of building data literacy across the board and not just leaving it to the big guys, the big data and the technical experts. It's actually opening up the room and getting more in there. And I think there's a big movement for Indigenous data sovereignty, which is such an important movement,
Mm.
and which is the right for Indigenous peoples to kind of govern the collection, ownership, and application of data about the communities, people's lands, and resources. And it has to happen, and it needs to, again, the governance around it, the systems in place, the ability for to people to be able to interact with it and be valued for being data custodians. That's the thing that excites me. Like, how can we value people for the data that they have that's inherent to them, and not just pay the technical experts, but actually pay people for what they can contribute, is the thing that I think is a really exciting kind of horizon for the data industry and the way that we think about data.
That's awesome. There's just been so much in this that has really opened my eyes, and we've talked before, so it shouldn't have been new, but it's such a great perspective on things, and so many things that I'm going to have to go away and think about really hard. Thank you so much. It's been wonderful to have this chat.
Yeah, thanks so much for the opportunity, Linda. It's been great.
Thanks for listening to Make Me Data Literate. You can support the work of the Australian Data Science Education Institute at givenow.com.au/ADSEI. Tune in next time for more conversations with amazing data experts.